There it is. So nobody in this room wants to hear a partisan political conversation right now. Instead, I'm going to issue a challenge. That challenge is that we need to evolve our communication strategy. Now, see, my story starts in the 70s and 80s, Cleveland, Ohio. And in the 70s and 80s in Cleveland, Ohio, the steel mills were all going out. U.S. Steel had shut down. LTV Steel had shut down. Warner and Swayze was moving their headquarters. And I learned to take confrontation a different way by hanging out in the eastern suburbs, punk rock taverns, and cutting out and leaving my folks wondering where I was late at night, and meeting a community of misfits on Cleveland's eastern suburbs. But my parents are very conservative. I grew up in eastern suburbs of South Euclid, Ohio. And these were all similar houses. And by similar, I mean every exact same location. These were ticky-tack houses post-World War II, where you knew where every bathroom and every kitchen was because everybody literally had the exact same floor plan. That's how the eastern suburbs of Cleveland were. And yeah, it's kind of funny. I grew up in like 1950s, Leave It to Beaver, Cleveland only. It was the 80s. The reality is that political communication moved very quickly. So if you think about it, the guy at the end of the street who put up a yard sign, you knew something about that. You knew that that endorsement meant something to the conversation. If somebody was knocking on your door, you knew who they were. You knew whose kid was hired by a campaign to go and do those door knocks. It was a different time for communication. And ultimately, my dad knew before I got home for dinner when I was playing hooky from school, because you see, he worked at a men's clothing store at the Cedar Center shopping center, and the guy that I was playing hooky with, his dad also worked at the shopping center. His dad was the barber, my dad was selling clothes, right? My first political recollection was growing up at Cedar Center shopping center. That was my world, and my dad took me to a church basement after working 60, 70 hours a week, worrying about, was I going to have a future? He never imagined that I'd be standing on a Poptech stage addressing you or working on 2 presidential campaigns. It was about survival and thinking about changing the norm. So we're in the church basement and we're thinking about how do you do an organizing strategy? How do you do a petition writing campaign? How do you do letter to the editor campaign? And eventually him and all of the local merchants got the local newspaper, the Sun Messenger, to write an article that ended this rally that they were worried about organizing against the city selling a piece of property to some monolithic organization that nobody had heard of that was going to put all of these local businesses out. And before I knew it, my dad had taken on in the 80s and beaten Walmart. I watched him win the battle against something that I didn't even know what it was. Now, again, this is not partisan politics. This is Cleveland before LeBron James and before Believeland. But I watched him win, and this was an amazing victory to watch. But did he really win? Because you see, Diamond's men's store is no longer. It's turned into Men's Warehouse. And the local greeting card store, you now buy your greeting cards at Target, right? So all of those local businesses, because they did not change and keep evolving, their strategies and their models are no longer here. Now, that newspaper that I was talking about that he did as his major piece of communications, that newspaper is no longer here. And those neighborhoods are no longer the same way that we organize. And we all can look around and go, wow, Scott's saying the obvious and we know this. But then why is it October of an election year and we're all talking about ground game? And I hear this campaign's got better ground game and they're knocking on doors better. I am here today to say that door knocking for people doesn't work anymore, right? You don't know your neighbors anymore. Your best friend growing up is no longer the kid that you can go 3 doors down, right? People are still having a community. It just doesn't work the same way anymore. So why are we doing our communication strategies the exact same year after year after year? And if you think about it, we already know this. The beauty of Bernie's campaign was not that we were just able to communicate and raise $221 million online. That's great, but it was a connection. It was the personal interaction. The woman in Ottumwa, Iowa felt connected to a bigger community. that if you were the one token Bernie Sanders supporter in the middle of nowhere, you felt a bigger connection. So my punk rock challenge to you is looking around, asking yourself what tools and technology that you're hearing about on this stage today can you actually add to your communication strategy? Or are you going to do the exact same thing that you did from year after year after year? Now, I've fought a lot of battles, and I've taken on city halls. And my one toughest challenge of taking on a city hall was in New York City for CBGBs, trying to get a historic landmark of the home of punk rock, where the Ramones started and a bunch of other amazing bands started. And so I thought I knew a bunch of stuff about emails and petition writing. And then I sat there and late night after the bar was closed with bartenders and giant tatted up bouncers. And instead, these guys all have free sex, drugs, and rock and roll available to them. And instead of drinking a bunch of booze and hanging out, they were like a campfire looking at their MySpace page and organizing people in MySpace and communicating. And I thought, wow, if I can bring this into the anti-war movement, what is MySpace going to do? If I can bring this into the net neutrality movement, how can MySpace actually be the form of communication before the other side even figures it out? Now listen, I'm standing on this stage today humble and proud that I was able to work on the Barack Obama campaign, but I don't want to be known as Barack Obama's MySpace guy. It's not good for the brand. So organizing has moved much, much faster and further, right? If you think about Bernie's campaign, Feel the Burn was a hashtag that we didn't even create. Let me let you in on a little secret. Bernie Sanders didn't even like the Feel the Burn idea. It wasn't about that. It was about the fact that we are watching people organizing faster and using hashtags in a faster way and doing rapid response communication without worrying about what the political pundits are saying. Now, I'm not sure if this election cycle, if this is the Meerkat election, the Periscope election, the Snapchat election, but I am here today to say that you have to, as an organization, have a communication strategy that includes mobile. 50% of all of our digital communication came from a mobile phone. If you think about that, 42% of all of our contributions came from mobile technology. So the future is mobile. If you do not have a mobile communication strategy, you are going by the same way that I did with MySpace and Barack Obama's campaign. You are not changing and evolving with the time. Now, there's billions of text speeches about cord cutters. I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of that, but let me talk about it as how it affects political communication. You see, NBC Universal, we know naturally, is not seeing the same numbers as they saw in years past for the Olympics. Now, you can't imagine NBC Universal being like, hey, every Olympic athlete, can you guys not text or tweet out whether you won the award or not, because ultimately, I don't want a spoiler alert during our primetime airing, right? That's not how we watch and consume and engage in television. So why today in 2016 are there still political campaigns that over the summer spent $13 million on just NBC Universal during the Olympics and $0 on digital for the entire summer? That, my friends, is what I'm talking about. Doing something and changing the norms, looking in at yourself and going, wait a minute, this makes no logical sense. How are my kids using technology, and how should I be using technology in the year's future? Now, we just watched a bunch of different debates. Think about the debates. Wired magazine had an amazing quote about the debates, and it basically is, a debate lasts about 90 minutes, the internet lasts forever. And if you think about that, you are watching the engagement rates of all of these debates moving forward and forward. So, what are you going to do about it? I know that I need to constantly reinvent myself, challenge my inner punk rock self to think about how are communities organizing in new and creative ways. I know that the future of democracy is counting on us, especially after watching last night's debate. If we are not engaging in this, we are going by the way of MySpace. So I need you to, on behalf of Cleveland, on behalf of watching my dad using the communication model that he was able to use to win by using the newspaper, evolve your communication strategy even further, like a bunch of bartenders at punk rock nightclubs were able to do. And if they can do it, you can do it too. Thank you.